Okay, so when I watched the video, I realized a lot of the Bible study, I thought I had the Word document handout up on the screen, but it was still back on the Bible reading program. So I'm going to try to do better here tonight. The handout for chapters 3 through 5, I just wanted to do a little wrap up on that first of all. Let me get to where I can share something on the screen. Let me pull up the PowerPoint. First of all, some of the slides here. We have this map of the Middle East. You have the city of Babylon there on the Euphrates, and also Nineveh up above it, but up on the Tigris River. And this is the center of where so much of what we're reading in the book of Daniel is taking place. But Babylon, as we're toward I think we ended around the middle of chapter 5, and we've got a situation where the Medes and the Persians have risen up in power. Babylon is about to go down. It's going to fall overnight, as was prophesied. But here is a map, a sketch. Again, I didn't look up where I got this. I've got it somewhere, but just showing the ancient city of Babylon with the walls, huge walls, very high. Archaeologists have found that the walls were some 90 to 100 feet high. One report, the one by Herodotus, was that 2 chariots could meet each other on top. It was that wide. But here we have the Ishtar Gate. It's written so small you probably can't read it. But that was the main gate in. And the German archaeologists were there first. They took a lot of the tiles and reconstructed it in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. Beautiful tile work throughout. Wanted you to notice once again where you see the processional lions down there. And there's more of a close-up, the lions. So remember those, because that's going to tie in as we get to chapter 7, as Babylon is likened to a lion. Okay, well, I think that's all I'll mention from there. But from let me get the notes back up. All right, from the handout last time, point 4 had some of the particulars about the city of Babylon. And the way that it fell is a fascinating story. I won't take a lot of time, but the Euphrates River was actually diverted over into an empty, a dry lake bed where they had excavated clay for baking the bricks to build the walls around the city. And so the forces of the Medes and Persians diverted the water into that dry lake bed, meaning the water through the city fell down, and they were able to walk in from either end through the riverbed. They had some spies, some agents inside who opened some key gates, and they went into the city in the midst of, well, the story of what we're reading here in chapter 5, kind of a drunken orgy. But it mentions here the Ishtar Gate, Nebuchadnezzar's palace, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon was one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world. But I wanted to focus just a little here on this material under point number 5. I would at least like you to be familiar with it. As we get further into the chapter, let's see, I forget where we actually read to, but Daniel, verse 14 and on, Daniel is called in to interpret the hand that was writing on the wall. And so he addresses the king in verse 18. He reminds him of Nebuchadnezzar. It says your father, but the word means probably it was a grandfather of this Belshazzar, and reminds him of the glory of Babylon under Babylon, because verse 19 mentions, because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Then notice, whomever he wished he executed, whomever he wished he kept alive, whomever he wished he set up, and whomsoever he wished he put down. So that was Babylon at the height of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. It was steadily losing ground and going down, and Belshazzar and the king that he actually was co-regent with had nowhere near the power that Nebuchadnezzar had quite a number of years earlier. Verse 20, 21, it talks about when Nebuchadnezzar's heart was lifted up, he fed from the grass of the field. But verse 22, see, Daniel is not, he's not checking his blows, he's just firing away. He says, but you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. So he fires away. You knew this, so you've got a higher, a greater accountability. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They brought out the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, etc., have drunk wine from them and praised the gods of silver and gold, and etc. So, verse 24, the fingers of the hand were sent, the writing was written. So, we get to the words, and here on point number 5, we have the words many, but it's repeated. But many means numbered, counted out, or measured. So he's numbered, he's counted, that's done again, so to speak. Then it says tekel, word meaning to weigh, and then upharsin. The u in this is actually still a part that's in Aramaic, the old Chaldean language, and it just means and then farsin. That's a plural form of pares, but it means to divide. And at the bottom here, the last bullet under point 5, I just think you ought to be at least aware of this, but we do want to be careful with prophetic interpretations that we don't paint ourselves into a corner somewhere. We don't want to, I think I used the example the last time, you don't do a crossword puzzle with hammer in hand, that if it's close and it doesn't fit, you pound on it to make it go in. We let the Bible interpret it. But it is interesting, as you'll see here, and the Bible reading program also has a section on this as well. But these terms also have they are weights, and they have a currency, a monetary value. The many is 50 shekels. The tekel, close to shekel, is just singular, just one. And then the farsin is the equivalent of a half mina or many, 25. So that's where I have the math there so you can look at it. 50 plus 50 plus 1 plus 25, 126 shekels. However, Exodus 30 verse 13 mentions that a shekel was the same as 20 gerahs. Now, you may feel this is pretty far-fetched to make a connection, but I think you need an exposure to it, because it's not just Church of God literature, but I've seen it in other writings as well. If you then multiply the 126 times 20 gerahs in each shekel, you come up with that number 2,520. So 2,520. And we're left with a question. Did God intend a parallel message here about the 2,520 years on Babylon? Last time we looked at, with Nebuchadnezzar's insanity, that there would be 7 times that would pass on Babylon. It would be cut down, the stump banded, then they're removed, and it's able to arise and flourish and be a factor on the world scene yet again. So just again, something for you to be aware. So I think that catches us up on what I had intended to cover on chapter 5. And I'm going to get out of that one and back over to tonight's handout. So with the end of chapter 5, we read, in that night, and it's interesting that there is a prophecy in Isaiah 21 verse 4, 21 verse 4, regarding Babylon being punished, that it would fall in one night, very short period of time. Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain. So when Daniel is there and gives the interpretation, Belshazzar only has a few hours to live. Verse 31, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now, I'm reading from the old King James here in part tonight. But Darius the Median, it's somewhat confusing, and that's why I wanted to put it here on the handout. The Bible commentary, at least the PDF version that I sent to you, I had to take all the different pieces and put them together. But pages 48 through 52 has a lot of information, a lot of material about Darius and the possibilities as far as who this is. As the 3 bullets here, these are the 3 main suggestions. Some suggest that Darius was another name for Cyrus. Well, the Bible reading, Bible commentary covers that, discusses that. It's actually quoting from the International Standard Bible Dictionary. Or rather, it's the Expositor's Bible Commentary. But there is wording later in Daniel that makes it seem to me very unlikely that the 2 were one and the same, 2 different people. But then the second bullet from the ISBD, there is this governor named Gubaru. Now that's that Gubaru. I've seen it spelled other ways, but this Gubaru was appointed governor over just that immediate region of Babylon by Cyrus. And so he was the one left in charge because Cyrus went on, he had other wars, other exploits, and this Gubaru was the one who was essentially there running the day-to-day operations in the absence of Cyrus. So I tend to lead to the second one, probably. I think this governor Gubaru was the regent who was authorized to run everything while Cyrus was absent. And then the third bullet, some even suggest Astyages, who was the father of Cyrus. So that's a possibility. But again, the Bible commentary, the file that I sent you, those pages will possibly give you more information than you really care to have. But I wanted to throw that out before we get into the next chapter. Also here, just for the sake of our discussion, and mainly for your information, point number 2, we have the dates of the Babylonian Empire, the various kings. We're just picking it up with Nebuchadnezzar because that's where the book of Daniel started. His father, Nabopolassar, had been had been the king, and Nebuchadnezzar was actually off in Egypt leading the forces of Babylon against the Egyptians. His father died, and then he hurried back because when a throne is empty, you better sit in it fast or somebody else is going to take it. So he reigned a long time, 605 down to 562 BC when he died. And last time we mentioned, probably late in his reign, 7 years of insanity, and then living one more year, and then he died. So he was then followed by his son, Evil Merodach. I tell you, they knew how to name sons back then, didn't they? Evil Merodach, also known as Amal Marduk. And he just reigned for a couple of years, but he is mentioned in the Bible. I've got the scripture here, 2 Kings 25:27, mentions this is the time of the captivity of Jehoiachin, and Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, the year he began to reign, released Jehoiachin, or Kin, king of Judah. All right, Evil Merodach was followed by Neriglissar. He was actually a son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, so he married into the family. Another name there, Nabonidus. Now, Nabonidus is the one who was the last king of Babylon, and he had Belshazzar acting as his co-ruler or co-regent in Babylon. You may remember when Belshazzar called in Daniel, he promised him, as a part of what he would receive, he promised him to be the number 3 person in the empire. And number 3, because you had Nabonidus was king, Belshazzar was his co-regent around the Babylonian region, and so those 2 jobs were taken. Okay, let's go ahead then to chapter 6. Chapter 6, because here we have, this is the story of Daniel being cast into the lion's den. We once again have the powers that be are jealous of the favor that Daniel has. From the outset, he was given tremendous power and authority, great favor, first of all from the prince or the kind of the overseer of the eunuchs for the king, and then by the Nebuchadnezzar. We see that favor continued. Possibly he didn't have the favor later on that he had under Nebuchadnezzar, but then whenever Belshazzar followed through and gave him great authority, and then Belshazzar died, but we see amazingly that with Cyrus coming on the scene, that Daniel continued to have tremendous favor with this king. So in chapter 6, again, I want to skim some of this. Verse 1, Darius, and so this dates it as around 539, because Babylon fell October 539 BC. It seems that everybody agrees with that date. And so this would be probably right at the beginning of his reign. And so Daniel, though, you think of it, if he was taken as a captive from Judah in 605, if he was around 15, 605, he's 15, and now here we have another 65 years. This is not a young kid. He's probably around 80-ish, if not early 80s. So there's a kingdom, there's 120 satraps. Verse 2, 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one. Daniel was first, as it says in the King James. Let's see, the satraps might give account to them, so the king would suffer no loss. So Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king sought to set him over the whole realm. Now, we have a plot that comes along. What is the saying? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And wired within the human spirit is a desire for power. And so we have certain ones setting a trap for Darius. And so verse 6, they go, "Oh, Darius, live forever." And in verse 7, they're laying out their plan that they have all consulted. Now, the problem is that Daniel, who was the chief of all these counselors, Daniel was not involved in this. They went around his position. And so we have consulted to establish a royal statute, make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. So the king signed the decree, verse 9. He didn't see what was happening. They caught him looking the other way. He wasn't paying attention. And so it went into law. And then we come to Daniel. In verse 10, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem. You know, he'd been 65 years, I suppose, with his heart back home in Jerusalem. That was had long been in ruins by this time, although it had not been destroyed whenever he was taken captive. He knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as his custom since early days. So this gives us insight into the discipline, the character of Daniel, and it's all admirable. Just a man who is going to walk by faith. He is going to put God first, come whatever may, whatever plot, and obviously he was aware. So, of course, he is discovered, which I'm sure we had those who were watching carefully to see if he would continue. They go running to the king in verse 12. And the king answered, verified, yes, that's according to the law of the Medes and Persians. It does not alter. And so verse 13, they drop the trump card on him. And that Daniel, who's one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And so the king, verse 14, and the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself. You see, he recognized this was all a setup job and that he got duped. And he was probably very upset with himself that he got caught this way. So let's see. Verse 16, the king gave the command. They brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. And so we're left to wonder, how much did Darius recognize, as Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had earlier come to recognize, that Daniel's God is a very powerful God. I don't know that Nebuchadnezzar ever came to the point to say that Daniel's God is the only one true God. But he certainly recognized him as being a marvelous supreme being with great power. So maybe Darius is saying, well, I signed the law and it can't be changed and I can't help you now, so we'll hope your God will help you. So, verse 17, the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. And it's probably good to point out, a lot of your commentaries will draw the connection between Daniel being placed in this den, this hole in the ground, a stone's put over it, a seal is placed on it. That is exactly what was done to Jesus Christ. You remember he was in the tomb. Some of the Jewish leaders went complaining, we don't want his disciples to steal the body. And so, of course, a stone had been rolled over the entrance, but a seal was placed on it, and soldiers were set there. But as we go on, verse 18, lo and behold, isn't it interesting that the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting? No musicians were brought in before him. His sleep went from him. He got up early in the morning, went in haste to the den of lions. He came, he cried out, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? And he was relieved to hear Daniel's reply, O king, live forever. God sent an angel that shut the lions' mouths, and because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I've done no wrong before you. So the king was exceedingly glad for him, but notice what happened. And this kind of reminds me of the story in Esther. Here you had Haman, this great enemy of the Jews, who came up with this plot to get the Jews to be exterminated. And when everything came out, when Esther went in to see the king, then the gallows that Haman had constructed were used to hang Haman himself. So Daniel was taken up out of the den. Let's see. Oh, yes, the end of verse 23. Daniel taken up out of the den, no injury whatever was found on him because he believed in his God. So once again, a wonderful example of living by faith. In fact, Hebrews 11, well into it, about verse, 30-ish or so, it stops naming names, but just mentions in general some of the men and women of history of faith. And it mentions stopping the mouths of lions. Certainly, Daniel was one who would fill that. So, Darius honors God, verse 24, but also he gave the command that those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them with their children, wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. So we see that the lions were hungry, and the lions were ready to devour something. And so the accusers and their families were thrown in, and they're all destroyed. And so Darius sends out a decree to all peoples. Verse 26, I decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God. So again, it's wonderful what he says. He's certainly sobered and stunned at this point, but we don't find him coming into the church either. So notice the end of chapter 6, verse 28. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And actually, you know, the list that I had up there actually is still on the screen. You have you have Nebuchadnezzar, evil Merodach, Neriglissar, Labashi Marduk, Nabonidus, Belshazzar, and now Cyrus, Darius. You have all these kings of Gentile governments with a very beast-like mind. And God gave Daniel favor all the way through. But it says in the reign of Cyrus of Persia, and actually the last reference we have is in the 3rd year of Cyrus. So even beyond that point, to a degree. Okay, chapter 7. We shift here into chapter 7, and we have a bit of a different approach. Here we have Daniel having dreams and seeing visions in the night. It's not that others have them and he then is given the interpretation, but Daniel is having dreams and visions at night, and he is writing it down. So notice the dating here, first of all, chapter 7, verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Now, in one of the earlier handouts, actually it was a handout on the first handout, point number 3. I had a number of bullets where it points out the book of Daniel does not follow just logically, chronologically. It skips around back and forth. So with chapter 7, we're in the first year of Belshazzar. The first year of Belshazzar. Now we know Belshazzar's reign ended 539 BC. And I think it was that he was in power for 11 years. So we're going back, 11 years before that. So maybe just after 550, maybe 549, 48, somewhere in there is when this event is taking place. So he had a dream, visions of his head upon his bed, and he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters, or telling the main facts. And so what he wrote down, verse 2, I saw in my vision by night, behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, you might want to check later Revelation 13. Revelation 13 is a chapter that deals with this beast coming up out of the sea. There are a lot of parallels. In fact, Daniel 2, 7, and 8 make it possible for us to understand what we do understand of Revelation 13 and 17. But they come up out of the sea. Verse 3, 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. Now, pausing again. Chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream was of this great warrior image, head of gold, shoulders, arms of silver, all the way down. You had the image of a great warrior. Here, we begin to have this concept of the beast. These world-ruling empires are like ravenous beasts that when push comes to shove, there is the mindset of a beast. So the first was like a lion. Now, Daniel's going to interpret it here in a little while, but you'll remember at the Ishtar Gate area, I think there were 160 of those tile lions lining the processional way up to and through the Ishtar Gate. So the lion is something that is connected with Babylon a number of ways. There actually are scriptures that will point out the same connection. Okay, a lion and had eagle's wings. Well, an eagle has 2 wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, very easily we make the connection there to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar being lifted up and God brought him down. He lived as a beast. He had, as it were, the spirit of a beast for those years, 7 years. But then God gave him the heart of a man once again. So several things tie it in with Babylon. The lion represents Babylon. Verse 5, And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. So it's like a bear. The first one was like a lion, but it had wings. This one is like a bear. It was raised up on one side. And I've read where that denotes getting itself up for the attack mode, to charge and to attack, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. So again, these empires are described as being beasts. This next one, we already know that Babylon was followed by Medo-Persia. It'll be named by name later in the book. But the Medes and the Persians, basically their history was that of carnage, of just being a chronicle solely of warfare, and just churning up peoples and overrunning. But we'll come back a little bit to the 3 ribs. There were 3 main conquests of the Medes and the Persians. Verse 6, after this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. So it's like a leopard. So we've got to think of the characteristics of a leopard, but also it had 4 wings. And I think that's going to play in. We'll see it more so in the next chapter, next time, where this kingdom, which is Greece, the Greco-Macedonian Empire, when it fell after Alexander's death, it was divided into 4 provinces, 4 regions, overseen by the chief generals of Alexander. The beast also had 4 heads, and that's important here, and it's going to be important in Revelation 13. 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Verse 7, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. So the first 3 were like a literal animal, like, but not quite. This one's unlike anything else. This one has iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Again, remember that. That will play in. That will be very, very important. Okay. 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn. Okay. Don't get too overwhelmed. It's easy to piece this together. A little one, another horn, a little one. I would add, it started out small and weaker, but it was there. But then later we're going to find that it's the one that really is holding all the power. Before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. Okay, now, verse 9. What we have seen thus far, again, many parallels back to chapter 2. Chapter 2 looked at 5 kingdoms: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then that stone cut without hands that dashed the 4 of the above. And the kingdom of God was represented. We have the same thing in this chapter. We have Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But also now, we're not through. We're going on to this 5th kingdom, the kingdom of God. And I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days were seated. Now, I would like to point out, the King James also says the Ancient of Days. We might tend to think God the Father, but hold on. The Jewish Tanakh translation renders that as one of the Ancient of Days. And I think we need to realize or remind ourselves that Ancient of Days can refer to both the Father and the Son as we know them today. As the story unfolds, though, we see this place, it is referring to the one we know as Jesus Christ, the one who is the coming King of the kingdom. But notice the description of this. He did sit, his garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. Now, if you go back to the middle part of Revelation chapter 1, Revelation 1 verses 13 through, I think, verse 16, John gives a description of the glorified Jesus Christ. And a lot of these phrases are the same as you read in Revelation 1, only it's clearly describing Jesus Christ. In verse 10, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. So if you take 1,000 times 1,000, just a 1 and then 6 zeros, 1 million. Perhaps here speaking of 1 million angels who were his personal servants. But then it says 10,000 times 10,000s before him. So 4 zeros and 4 more is 8, a 1 and 8 zeros, that's 100 million. 100 million. And we've wondered, is this an indication of how many angels there are? If this is referring to 101 million angels, these are the 2/3 that remained faithful. There's another then 50,000 who followed Satan. But that's just something we can speculate and wonder about. The court was seated, the books were opened. Verse 11, I watched then because the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. So that's the little horn, but the one who then begins speaking, and as this chapter unfolds, we see it's the one that really has the power. I watched till the beast was slain. All right. And its body destroyed and given the burning fire. Well, I would recommend you read the end of Revelation 19, verse 20. And it talks about the beast and the false prophet being thrown into the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. Revelation 19:20, then also Revelation 20, verse 10. Both of those have the same sense. A burning flame. As the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Okay, a season and a time. We ran into that times and a half a time last chapter, and we're going to see it again before this book is over. Verse 13, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days. So here we have the terminology shifted. They're both Ancient of Days as far as having no father, no mother, no beginning, no ending. But up in verse 9, Jesus Christ is described as coming in that kingdom. So here he's described as like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and brought him near before him. There was given him dominion and glory and kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. Isaiah 9, verse 7, of the increase of his government and peace shall be no end. And his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Then in verse 15, we realize that Daniel, he's got some heavy burdens dropped on him by what he is seeing and then having to write down. A lot of it, in fact, he's told in chapter 12, he was told, no, it's not for you. it's sealed to the time of the end. So some of the things he was never given an understanding of. But verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. Again, let's remember, if this is the first year of Belshazzar, we're still looking at a man who's well up in his years. He's probably 70-ish, thereabouts. And I came near to one of those who stood by, some of the angelic beings that were present, and asked him the truth of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are four, again, beast. We keep coming back to these are like carnivorous beasts of the earth, are four kings. So what he just saw as looking like four animals are actually four kings, and the king is going to have a kingdom which arise out of the earth. But see, there's that fifth kingdom as well. The saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Verse 19, then I wish to know more about the fourth beast. This one really stood out, and this one troubled him. It was different from the others, exceeding dreadful, its teeth of iron, nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet. The 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn, which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. So this little horn, who has a mouth that speaks great things, he's now the one who's a focus, more so than the others. Verse 21, as I was watching, the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. And, since this first beast began then in the days of Babylon, we're looking all across the ages, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, the various resurrections of Rome, all the way to the time of the end when it's finally put down and destroyed by the stone cut without hands. But across the ages, prevailing against them. We have the biblical record. We have other, you look at the Middle Ages, you've got some of the Inquisitions, the Spanish Inquisition. You had the Albigensian Crusade, finding these Sabbath keepers scattered up in the Alpine mountains, and the persecution of against the Lollards and supporters of John Wycliffe. You have the Jan Hus revolt there in Prague, Czech Republic. And across the ages, there's been this power that has gone out, has used that power against the saints of God, who have, as Revelation says, the testimony of Jesus, but they have the law of God. They just happen to believe that God meant what he said as far as the sanctity of the seventh day. Until the Ancient of Days came and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So, verse 23, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth. So there he makes a connection. All of these we're talking about kingdoms that would reign on the earth. This is the fourth one, which shall be different from the other kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, trample it, break in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings. Now, I have on the screen, I hope you can see it still, but I have the handout, point 4, the 10 horns of Daniel 7 equal the 10 resurrections of this fourth beast. Here you have a listing, and I'm going to show you a scan of a document from the old booklet, Who is the Beast, here in just a moment. But you have these successive, phases or resurrections of the Roman Empire. First the Vandals, then the Heruli, then the Ostrogoths. These were some of the barbarian kingdoms that were essentially, by decree of the papacy, they were uprooted and thrown down. Then from Justinian, you had a marriage of church and state. Not so much the old Roman Empire, but now with the church factor, you have the phrase from history, the Holy Roman Empire. The church influenced, the church led, the church allied kingdom. And you have Justinian, 554 AD, the imperial restoration over in Constantinople. You have different times in history when the Holy Roman Empire would rear its head once again. Satan builds his house every so often. It flourishes a while, then it goes down. You have Charlemagne. Charlemagne, 800, actually before 800. 800 is the year on Christmas Day when he was anointed as the Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. Otto the Great, the Habsburgs, the dominant one being the Habsburgs under Charles the Great in the 1500s from over in Spain. Napoleon. Napoleon had Rome stamped all over his empire. His son was called the King of Rome. He took that title. And then you have the one from the late 1800s into the middle of the 20th century. You had in Italy, you had Garibaldi, you actually had King Victor Emmanuel. Then World War I happened, but the seeds were sown for another battle. And in short order, it came again. We had World War II, Mussolini and Hitler, the Axis powers. And the 10th is yet to come. We don't know the name. We look at the European Union. We keep our eyes on Europe. That has been the key. That is the pattern of history. So back to Daniel 7, verse 25, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High. So blasphemous words. Shall persecute the saints of the Most High. Shall intend to change times and law. Now let's pause on that one. Times and law. We have religious persecution, yes, but look at what was changed. I've got a copy of the history, the story of the Christian Church by Jesse Hurlbut. He's the one that coined the phrase, the age of shadows. As you get late in the first century, he said it's like a curtain descended, and then 100 years later it lifts, and you look at the church that is extant then, later on, and it's nothing like the church that is the church of the book of Acts and then on through the rest of the first century until we lose sight of it for a while. The Sabbath was changed. We have not God's holy days, but we have a whole system of worldly holidays that are kept. And to this day, every so often, we have the attempts of coming up with some kind of a new world calendar where there would be rotating weeks. And it's a fascinating study to read about all of the calendar changes across the ages, and the weekly cycle of 7 days God has never allowed man to touch that. But we hear of it once in a while. A lot of calendars anymore, instead of starting with Sunday as the first day, they start with Monday. And it's like, is man being pre-programmed for a time when it's just going to be openly changed? Well, we don't know. So, intend to change times and law. The saints shall be given into his hand. Notice, We've seen this phrase before, for a time, times, and half a time. So there is that phrase once again. We discussed it last week, a time, different scriptures that lead us to narrow down that a time equals a year. And then by their practice, times was the immediate multiple. So times will be 2 a year, 2 years, and half a year. 3.5 years. Most assuredly looking at the final 3.5 years of the reign of man. 42 months of the beast, same time. 1,260 days, the church flees into the wilderness, same time. So, times, and half a time. But the court shall be seated. They shall take away his dominion to consume and devour it, to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, he says, I have had it. My thoughts are greatly troubled. My countenance changed, kept the matter in my heart. Now, point number 5, before I drop this from the screen, point number 5, the 4 world ruling empires of Daniel 2, including the stone cut without hands, correspond to these 4 beasts of Daniel 7, and I should have added with the kingdom given to the Son of Man and the saints. These go together to make up this composite beast spoken of in Revelation 17. From out of the sea, this beast, 7 heads, 10 horns. But that's a story for another time. Let me pull up something else here that I have. The old booklet, Who is the Beast, has this chart in the middle. I think a later version was Who or What is the Prophetic Beast, and each of them in the middle, the centerfold, so to speak. We have this chart, and here we have, if you follow the columns, Daniel 2 is down to column 1, Daniel 7, column 2, Daniel 8, Revelation 13, 17. It lines them all up. So I need to send this to you. If you don't find it easily, at least you'll have a copy of this one that I scanned. But here we can follow it across from left to right. Daniel 2, the head of gold, is the same as Daniel 7, the first beast like the lion. Explanation, first head of prophetic Babylon. And that is the Chaldean Empire, Babylonian Empire, and gives the dates. Next column, Daniel 2, that's a typo, the breast and arms of silver. Okay, it is the same as the second beast that was like a bear. And I won't pause there at chapter 8, but this is the second head of Babylon, but it's the Medo-Persian Empire. And then let's see, we're getting right about at time to call this to an end, but the belly and thighs of brass, the beast that's like a leopard, and that's all the way to the right, that's Greece. And then we have the legs of iron, the feet with iron and miry clay mixed, and we have then this is the Roman Empire. And that was like the 4th beast with iron teeth and 10 horns that Daniel saw in Daniel chapter 7. Okay, let me drop that one out. Let me see if that was, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to put up on the screen. Now, I didn't get back to the 3 ribs, but we'll come back to that later on, but these were the bear with the 3 ribs. The Medo-Persians had great conquests against Babylon, against Egypt, and then most of Asia Minor, you had the kingdom of Lydia. So those 3 were the 3 conquests. And I've got a commentary here. This is the Tyndall Bible Study Series, Tyndall Old Testament commentaries, the one on Daniel, and it's amazing that what conclusions they come to are the same as what the Church of God has taught for most of my life, all of my life, longer than I've been alive. So, okay, we're just past 8:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and we'll end the Bible study. I'll go ahead and hit unmute all